So you want to make your own Chaos Warband. That's a great idea. If you watched our previous video on making your own Loyalist chapter and enjoyed it, I'm sure you'll enjoy this one too, since it's our opinion that Chaos Warbands grant you a lot more freedom in your creation process than Loyalist chapters do. They do have some restrictions, of course, like with anything, but by the nature of what Chaos is, you're kind of encouraged to get a little bit wacky. Though, with that being said, we're not going to talk about anything related to Renegade chapters or Renegade Warbands, because they deserve their own video. Now, we got some really helpful criticism about the slightly unstructured nature of our last video, so I'm hoping you'll see that we've tried to do a little bit better with this venture into Chaos Space Marines. And who better to help us with that than an actual Chaos Space Marine?
Hi, I'm Aaron, a humble servant to the glorious Lord of Plagues, Nurgle. In regards to creating a more concrete structure for this video, we're going to break it up into the following sections: Origins and Gods, Approach to War, Characters, and Goals. We're also definitely going to hit some of the same beats as our last video in this series, make your own Loyalist Space Marines, since there are some things that all homebrewing shares, whilst also drawing comparisons to Loyalists, as most hobbyists typically make a Loyalist homebrew before they make a Chaos one, but you don't need to watch that video to understand anything we're going to talk about in this one. And of course, if you enjoy it, please consider liking and subscribing. So without further ado, let's talk about homebrewing your own Chaos Space Marine warband.
Starting with Origins and Gods, you have infinitely more to play around with in regard to Chaos Warbands, as opposed to Loyalist chapters. Now, whilst Loyalist chapters will usually be created with a distinct purpose, Chaos Space Marines tend to have their origins in any number of things, ranging from splintering off of one of the original traitor legions, all the way to being a young Loyalist chapter falling to a certain Chaos God or God's corruption after unique circumstances of your choosing. Maybe it was a chapter born of a very early founding, sent to defend the Imperium from a horrific and unknown Xenos menace in the Ghoul Stars, that only survived by leaping into the war, only to spend an incalculable amount of time in there, reappearing in the Era Indomitus, having succumbed to the worship of Nurgle as their only means of survival. Now, like with most Plague Marines, their memories and personalities are totally suppressed, and all they care for is the perpetrating of the Grandfather's will, in a galaxy they no longer recognize.
Maybe they were once a forgotten Imperial Fist successor, sent to hold back an endless tide of orcs in one corner of the galaxy, and after fighting tooth and nail for thousands of years in violent pride, they caught the Eye of Khorne, and almost without realizing it, gave themselves over to the Lord of Skulls. Or perhaps simply they are an amalgamation of word-bearers, Black Legionnaires and Iron Warriors who banded together after becoming dissatisfied with Abaddon's execution of the Chaos God's will, and are now a small warband from all over that worship the Chaos Gods in their entirety, with an emphasis on that worship above all else.
You see, when it comes to the worship of the Chaos Gods, you don't actually have to be shoehorned in any way.
You can combine pretty much any of the Chaos Gods as a point of your warband's worship, be it a warband called something like the Plague Berserkers that worship Khorne and Nurgle in equal measure, or a warband that feeds into scheming and seduction and utilising lots of cultists in a covert or subterfuge fashion called the Central Cabal.
Or have a warband that worships the Chaos Gods in their entirety but has a larger focus on one in particular, or even have a warband that has its origins lie in rejecting the Chaos Gods in certain ways. For example, a good friend of ours that goes by KPU or Enter the Butcher on Instagram has been working on a warband for a few years called the Iron Butchers, who are comprised of Space Marines that have splintered off from the Iron Warriors and the World Eaters that have come together to worship Khorne.
And as you might expect, the Iron Warriors amongst them have shed off their worship of Chaos Undivided in search of the favour of the Blood God.
Though one thing to keep in mind when combining the worship of Chaos Gods is that you'll have an extremely difficult time justifying the combination of Khorne and Tzeentch. These two do not play ball. I mean, of course, none of the Chaos Gods play ball, but these two especially despise each other. And of course, with that in mind, your chosen Chaos God can actually have a big influence on your warband's approach to war.
Though of course this doesn't mean that they need to be shoehorned into their god or god stereotypes, though they may gel better if they do. For example, a warband of sneaky boys are going to have a hard time working for Khorne, and conversely a warband all about attrition and durability may be best suited for Nurgle or Chaos Undivided, but you can still split these tropes up and play with them as much as you'd like.
Take Sorcerer heavy warbands for example. You may think that a warband that utilises lots of magic and warp fuckery may fit the worship of Tzeentch. And whilst you may be right, there's nothing stopping you from making a Nurgle or Slaaneshi warband that is renowned amongst its little hold in the warp or on the edge of real space for their excessive use of sorcerers and their unparalleled magic abilities.
And equally you can have a Khorne or Tzeentchian warband that uses an excess of demon engines to fulfill their purpose. So whilst there's a safety in tried and tested tropes, there's very little stopping you from subverting expectations and creating something unique.
There's also something potentially very important to a warband's approach to war that we haven't mentioned yet.
And what's that?
Their use of cultists.
Ah yes, you see, warbands don't have to use cultists at all, but it's very common for the normal human denizens of the Imperium to believe they found a quick route to power, in service to the Chaos Gods by becoming a warband's resident cultists.
Or alternatively, it's just as common for the normal denizens of the Imperium to be mentally corrupted in kind alongside the Space Marines that either rule their planet or have conquered it. And you can use these cultists as part of your warband's growing narrative. Are they just a mindless horde of idiots that charge as a sea of meat on the battlefield? Or maybe they're an organised force of ex-Imperial Guard soldiers serving what they genuinely believe to be a more reasonable regime. Or they could be your warband's best attempt at an infiltration force that sow corruption into hive cities before the greater warband's wholesale invasion. Or, perhaps, they serve multiple of these purposes, and only do so out of a terrible fear of retribution from their Chaos Space Marine overlords.
And as a Plague Boy myself, I'd be doing a huge disservice if I didn't mention that your cultists can be anything from mildly mutated all the way to full-blown chaos abominations. See the Death Guard's Poxwalkers. And on that note, when it comes to your warband's approach to war, consider asking yourself how physically corrupted by chaos they are. They could worship Chaos Undivided as a very grounded military force, or they could worship our great-grandpa Nurgle and have much of their warband be bloated, possessed monstrosities.
Another thing worthy of note is these talking points about cultists can almost always be applied to any allies your warband has, be it Chaos Knights or the forces of the Dark Mechanicum.
We can't forget to talk about demons.
Oh, of course not. Like with any allies, have a think about the appropriateness of your warband utilizing demonic assistance.
Whilst not all warbands will utilize demons to assist them, the ones that do will have an excellent excuse to indulge in narrative shenanigans to delve into the what, how, and why of demonic assistance.
Whether the demons are a result of your warband's patron's favor, or potentially, if the warband contains one utterly mad sorcerer that rampantly opens rifts in the warp whenever they get the chance. Anyways, let's talk about characters.
Yes, let's.
So just like in our last video in our Make Your Own series, when talking about Homebrew Space Marine faction characters, you'll have plenty of opportunities to dump a degree of power creep scattered across your homebrew, be it a Terran-born Chaos Lord that's been fucking around for 10,000 years with his own warband, and has spent that time amassing untold amounts of power and favour from his chosen god or gods, or potentially a Chaos Sorcerer that's done the same and is now a warp nightmare. You can have a lot of fun with these characters.
Something that sets itself apart from the loyalist homebrews that a Chaos Warband can employ as a named character is a Demon Prince. A Demon Prince is an absolute powerhouse, and depending on their Chaos patron, it could be a Demon Prince with powers that represent almost anything. Whether it's a Cornate Demon Prince with muscles that can only be surpassed by a Bloodthirster, or a Demon Prince of Tzeentch that has an absolutely almighty understanding of warp magics, in which nothing shy of a Lord of Change could best them in their warp-charged warfare.
You could also stretch things even further afield with a Demon Prince. A lot of Chaos Space Marine homebrewers with warbands that ride the horrors of the Dark Mechanicum will create Demon Princes that border on demon engines, with giant mechanized parts and unparalleled firepower bursting forth from their bodies. In fact, in my opinion, the best thing about doing Demon Prince characters is that you can have so much fun with their origins. As to become a Demon Prince, a Chaos Space Marine must do something or some things of totally incomprehensible horror in service to their chosen deity. A Demon Prince character I myself am working on currently does indeed straddle the line between Demon Prince and Demon Engine, after many centuries of hunting artifacts for the Dark Mechanicum and Vashtor the Arcathane, finally achieving a horrific heretic ascendancy.
You can really have fun with this character, and because he'll have to do such heinous things to become so heinously powerful, you can really let your creative juices go wild in coming up with narrative story points that are totally out of pocket. This Heretic Astartes demon could be the actual leader of your warband, a creature that scatters his biddings amongst his greatest Chaos Lords, or he could be a monster kept tied up in the lowest decks of your Cornate warband's flagship, only let loose when an enemy needs to be absolutely devastated.
And irrespective of how you choose to make your chapter's leadership, your warband's leader could very well play into how they decide their goals. You see, whilst it's pretty standard for a warband to simply seek out whatever they think may please their patron god, which you could definitely do, no problem, I personally don't think you'll have a lot of narrative fun with that. You see, why not consider your chosen Chaos Lord's goals as an individual? A warrior who rules with an iron fist, imposing his bidding unto his warband as a wrathful dictator. Hell, maybe his goal could be much like Nemeroth from the 2010 Space Marine game, a Chaos Lord that has grown to such magnitudes of power and strength solely to gain more power and strength in hopes that he will ascend to demonhood as a Demon Prince.
Or perhaps your warband's goal ties in with their origins. Maybe they were born of a splintered loyalist chapter and they seek to hoard power with the sole purpose of seeking out and destroying their parent chapter. Irrespective of whatever larger goal you choose, you can always tie this back in with their reason for existing in the first place should you want to. Or any of the other things we've talked about, like their approach to war. Maybe their ultimate goal is to please Khorne by fucking Tzeentch, and so despite having the Blood God's rage, they're incredibly adept at taking on psykers and sorcerers.
Even with all that being said, you could make their ultimate goal fluid. avoid. For example, if your warband is existing in a perpetual internal power struggle, like a lot of warbands do, their goals could change drastically over the millennia as the Chaos Lord in charge is repeatedly ousted. And finally, as you'll have noticed, we haven't mentioned many restrictions in this video like we did in the last one, though I will take a little bit of time now to mention some things that you may want to avoid. And just remember, I'm not your dad. You can do whatever you want. This hobby is ultimately here for your enjoyment and nothing else. If you genuinely feel like something I'm about to say stands between you and your enjoyment of the hobby, I'd recommend you just completely ignore it and continue to do what makes you happy. First up, as previously mentioned, you want to try to avoid having too much Khorne and Tzeentch collaboration outside of Chaos Undivided Forces. The hatred between these two and their respective forces, or at least Khorne's forces' hatred for Psykers, is kind of legendary, and it's something that makes their dynamic really special. Secondly, something that we mentioned in our first video when homebrewing your faction's narratives, be very careful of your warband's interaction with canon characters. The last thing you want to do is devalue a well-beloved established character. So, if a narrative talking point you want to use involves an established character, just take a few moments to think about their standing in the setting. Take Rowboat Girlyman, for example. Not only will it be very difficult to conceive of a character, demon prince or otherwise, that could best him in combat, but it would actually be really difficult to have a character that would ever get the opportunity to meet him at all. He's just too damn busy. So really take a few minutes to at least Google a wiki page for a character you want to use, and make sure you're being respectful of their standing in the setting. And to be fair, if you do use a named character or named forces, as this applies to not just characters but whole loyalist chapters and other factions too, heck, even other Chaos warbands, it'll do tons and tons of work for making your warband seem believable in the setting if you can just be respectful of them. And one last little thing. Living in the Warp is kind of like perpetually living in Game of Thrones, with everyone out for everyone else's blood at all times. So do keep that in mind when you want to think about the kind of numbers of Marines your warband has available. Outside of the big four traitor legions that still have their specific god's favour, the Black Legion, the Red Corsairs, and the Wordbearers are really the only warbands that have amassed large numbers of Marines. And it's part of their defining traits, you know, and much like the Black Templars is something that makes them really, really special. Anyways, that's really about it from me. Now, I'm sure there's more, but you guys can be trusted to make sure your warband isn't the 40k version of an overpowered anime character, right? Right? But in all seriousness, we did say at the start of this video that there's a lot more freedom with Chaos Space Marines because they can be immensely wacky, just by their very nature.
As mentioned in our last video, we're hoping to do a series soon where we're going to take your homebrew submitted through our Discord and go through them with a dramatic narrative reading, followed by us talking about why we really love your homebrew, and where we might steer its heading if we were given the reins ourselves.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you're enjoying our content, be it this video, the podcast, or even the shorts, we have a Patreon link down below that will give you access to all sorts, including behind the scenes, as well as things that will give you input in steering the direction of our content. And quickly, we wanted to shout out our new blessed patrons at the time of recording this video. Oxy, Rion, The Gaming Storyteller, Niklas, Voxcaster Nowhere, The Croc Enthusiast, Bobby Cool Pop, and Ollie Wally. Thank you guys so much. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much for watching.
Take it easy, everybody.